Hello class, we are the Happy Hormones presenting on code 306. First, we'll be presenting the data that we found to be either significant, of interest, or insignificant. Data that we found to be significant included a decrease in the body weight gained and in the tibia width of our experimental rats, indicating that the experimental rats were not growing nearly as much as the control rats. A significant decrease in the weight of both the thymus and the adrenal glands was also observed, indicating that these glands were not as active as they were in the control rats. A significant increase in the concentration of plasma-free fatty acids was also noted in the experimental rats. Our glucose tolerance test showed elevated but controlled levels, meaning that the experimental rats had more glucose in the blood, but that the levels followed the expected pattern of peaking before dropping off again. Data that we found to be of interest included a slight increase in the weight of the thyroid gland, as well as a slight increase in the uptake activity of the thyroid gland, showing that this gland was being stimulated, perhaps slightly more so than in the control rats. The ovaries and uterus of the female experimental rats, as well as the seminal vesicle and the ventral prostate of the male experimental rats, all showed a slight decrease in size, which led us to believe there may be a decrease in the function of the reproductive system. It is also worth noting that the uterus in our female rats appeared pale in comparison to that of the control rats. This could be an indicator of an irregular estrus cycle. Lastly, two pieces of data were considered insignificant. The weight of both the pituitary gland and the testes in our male experimental rats were comparable to the control rats, showing that these glands were operating within normal limits and not being affected by the hormone the rats were being injected with.
Now we are going to talk about the 3 additional tests that we ordered. One of them was vital signs, which gave us heart rate, respirations, body temperature, and the systolic and diastolic blood pressures. We also had an appearance test. We were looking for the quality of the hair, eyes, skin, and the limbs. Our final test that we ordered was the radioimmunoassay for ACTH, and we were testing that in the blood plasma. So the first test, vital signs, everything seemed normal in the control rats. However, for our experimental rats, all of our vital signs were slightly elevated, which to us indicated that the rats were under some sort of stress. Our next test was the appearance test. Once again, everything normal in the control rats. The coverage, the texture of the hair was normal, the eyes were normal, the texture and appearance of the skin, and the size and diameter of the limbs were all normal. In our experimental rats, the hair was more thin and coarse, the eyes were slightly bloodshot, the skin was thin and bruised more easily, and the limbs were thin and spindly. And that also was given to us in the original data, where tibia width for our experimental rats was lower than the tibia width of the control rats. So that was some additional data there. Finally, for our radioimmunoassay, once again, we were looking for adrenocorticotropic hormone in the blood plasma. For the control, the number was 1,343, and for the experimental rats, it was 3,544. So it turned out that the amount of ACTH was lower in our experimental rats than it was of the control rats, which was very surprising to us because we were originally going with ACTH as our hormone.
Given our data, we are now down to our top 3 hormones. Our top 3 hormones were ACTH, a glucocorticoid, and thyroid stimulating hormone. Process of elimination for the thyroid stimulating hormone. At first, thyroid stimulating hormone was in consideration. The reason why we were thinking our hormone could be thyroid stimulating hormone was that our rats had an increase in the size of their thyroid gland and had an increase in thyroid CPM. The target gland for thyroid stimulating hormone would be the thyroid gland for both growth and stimulation. The data that we encountered supported this because there was an increase in the size of the thyroid. Although, with further research, we determined that if there was an increase in thyroid stimulating hormone in our rats, then the heart rate of our rats would actually be decreased. Our experimental rats had an increase in heart rate, and our data was not able to support this. While some of our data did support our belief that our hormone could be thyroid stimulating hormone, we determined that the findings were not significant, and our data began to pull us in a different direction. we determined that the growth of a thyroid gland was not significant enough and that it was just considered to be of interest. Process of elimination for adrenocorticotropic hormone, also known as ACTH. Adrenal gland hormones were our next area of focus. The target area for ACTH hormone is the adrenal cortex for both growth and secretion. We had a significant decrease in the rate of the adrenal glands, a decrease in the amount of weight that the rats gained, and a decrease in tibia width. The decrease of the weight of the adrenal glands would account for the fact that it was not activated to secrete ACTH because there was already enough in the circulation. If the gland was not being activated, then the gland would therefore decrease in size. ACTH would also cause a limited weight gain. This is because an increase in ACTH causes an increase in the amount of cortisol that is being produced. This creates a higher heart rate, metabolism rate, and keeps the rats from gaining too much weight, having a lower bone mass. While we had data to believe that our rats could have been injected with ACTH, we had to further investigate. We determined that we wanted to look at the appearance test to figure if the rats had a Cushing's appearance to them. Some of the things to look for to determine if the rats had a Cushing's appearance would be to find out the quality of their fur, whether they had an elevated blood sugar concentration, and if they had a significant decrease in their body weight, and a lower adrenal weight than the controlled rats. All of our findings supported the hypothesis that our rats could have been given ACTH. We did in fact have a decreased body weight, an elevated blood sugar level, and a decrease in the adrenal weight. The final test had to be done to determine whether we were correct. This was the RIA test. We had to test if there was an elevated amount of ACTH in the blood plasma of our rats. This is what ruled out ACTH. The conclusion was that there was not an increase in the levels of ACTH in our rats' blood plasma, so we had to go in our final different direction. The process of diagnosis. ACTH was ruled out after the RIA test. We are now being pulled in a different direction. We are now going down the path to believe that we were dealing with a glucocorticoid. The first data that supported our findings was a decrease in the adrenal gland weight, an increase in blood sugar levels, and a decrease in the size of the rat's bones and their overall weight. Of these findings, we continue to believe that we are dealing with a glucocorticoid, so we presumed a vitals test. Our vitals test was determined that our rats had an elevated heart rate, respiration rate, body temperature, and blood pressure. The higher vitals would indicate that our rats were under high levels of stress and could have had an increase in the amount of glucocorticoids in their body. The appearance test indicated that our rats were unhealthy and their bones were brittle and light in weight. This could be that too many glucocorticoids in their system would suppress the body's ability to absorb calcium and could lead to osteoporosis and a decrease in their tibia width. The increase of the levels of cortisol and triglycerides would be because of an increase in glucocorticoids would cause the rats to have an increase in plasma fatty acids. All of this data continue to have us believe that we are dealing with a glucocorticoid, and after ACTH was ruled out, we know this must have been our hormone. Results. In conclusion, we reached a diagnosis of our unknown hormone being a glucocorticoid due to the overwhelming amount of data and physical signs observed to support our hypothesis that this was our hormone.